Hello, Rumbie.
Hi, Amandine. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good, thank you. I'm really excited because I think this is your first live event that you're preparing for.
Yes, it is.
So, can you tell us a bit more about your podcast, maybe?
Okay, so my podcast is, I'm calling it a literature-based podcast because I talk about books. I think that fiction has a lot to teach us because when you read fiction, you meet a lot of different characters in a lot of really different situations, some of which we can't actually replicate in real life, but also some of which we sort of forecast. So I read a lot of sci-fi, and science fiction has been teaching us about what the future could look like and the world that we're now living in. We're talking all the time about AI. A lot of that and a lot of the concerns that we currently have about AI have been addressed in science fiction. And so through my podcast, I pick a book, usually fiction, and I say, what can this book teach us? And then I usually pick just a small aspect of the book. For example, if I was going to talk about, I don't know, iRobot or something, and then I would talk about an aspect of that. Do we want to have robots? Right now, we know there are a lot of companies that are working on mobility aids for older people. So it could be good, but what are the negatives? And then I like to just pick out a small aspect of the book, talk about why that matters, and apply it more widely. Occasionally, I talk about my own experiences, but I've not had a personal robot. So if I was going to talk about something like that, I wouldn't. But it's just a way of trying to, number one, encourage more people to read, and then number two, to think more deeply about what fiction can teach us.
Quite interesting
I
indeed.
think so.
That's why you made a podcast about
I
it,
made
I
a
guess.
whole podcast talking to myself.
So, you're living in Brussels,
I'm
right?
living in Brussels.
So, why do a podcast in English? I guess this is your native, maybe?
Okay, yeah. So I'm coming from the UK and my French is just not up to scratch yet. But because I also read in French and I'm now learning Dutch, French and Dutch are next on my list. I quite like different languages. I'm also from Zimbabwe and I also read in Shona. So I will actually be incorporating books in the different languages as I go along. It's simply that this is still
Okay.
early days and I've read more books in English than I have in any other language. So I'm starting with the books that I'm confident with and then I'll be weaving in the others. I have an episode planned just on language itself. So having learned different languages, I'd like to talk about how those languages come together, the things that they have in common. Like now that I've been learning Dutch, I'm like, oh, this is so similar to English because of this and that. So language is definitely going to come up. It just hasn't yet. Stay tuned.
What about your community, though? Is it located in Belgium or is it in the UK, maybe? Do you know where your community is?
My community that's watching or that's listening,
Listening to the podcast.
honestly, so far, I'm not sure. I saw somebody was listening from the Middle East, and I tried to see if any of my friends were in the Middle East, because maybe they were on holiday, maybe they were in an airport. But so far, I've not identified that at all. I'm just excited
Okay.
that two people listen to each podcast.
I reckon there is more people listening to your podcast. So you're preparing, we are recording this before the event, and I guess you are in the middle of the preparations
Yes,
for
very
your
much.
big scene, your big day. So what are you planning to do? How are you preparing all that?
Oh, okay. So for the event, because my podcast is about books, I don't want to talk about a single one. So it's going to be a whistle stop tour. So really
Okay.
a speed tour through all the different books, trying to weave together a narrative about why books are good, how they come together, and all the different little themes. So I want to talk about architecture. I want to talk about language. I want to talk about love, cookery, magic, technology. I'm going to talk at some point about Tesla and people stealing patterns from people because all these are in different books. And so I'm going to be weaving very quickly through all the different books that I want to talk about, that I have spoken about, so that people know if they say, oh, I'd like to listen to this podcast, they know exactly the kind of thing that they'll have coming.
This is quite exciting for Pod Brussels to have a podcast in English. This is the very first time. And I've been told Brussels is quite a multicultural city.
Yes.
So that's quite exciting as well. So thank you for accepting the invitation.
Thank you. I'm hoping my Dutch will be good enough to do one in Dutch next year.
So really focusing on your podcast and doing a live show. So quite exciting.
Yeah, I
So
mean, Because I just started, I still feel that there's a lot that I can say in this sphere, and then build it out and maybe start to have a book club around some of these books. And I think that would be my ultimate dream, to have a book club where we pick a book that I've spoken about in the podcast and then we discuss it. Because with the podcast, it's me telling you what I think, me drawing out the issues that I see. But I would really love to hear what people think and what they experience from the books.
So that's a sneak peek on the future of There's a Book for That. Finger crossed. So thank you, Rumbie, for today. Exciting to see your podcast and what it will become.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to it.
So see you during PodBXL?
See you in July.